So I've been skirting around the issue for a while now. My bike's been running rich, and the front cylinder, which is this one, is typically running richer than the back cylinder. Now when I got the bike it was actually worse. This one is running way richer than the front one, but it seems like over time it's running more and more rich, and now they're both running rich. I think it's time to fix this problem, and you won't believe what the actual problem was. So I've had my bike for about a year now, and it came with a Mikuni carb, and the guys at V-Cycles in Pretoria actually serviced this carb before I bought the bike. It was a previous owner. And I've had some weird stuff happening. I've had one cylinder that runs rich, and now after about 6 or 7 months, actually closer on to a year of riding, now both cylinders are starting to get rich. So I've decided to pull this carb and just have a look at what they've done and maybe fix up whatever issues they did. Now, look, first things first, I need to give the guys a little bit of slack, because if someone takes a bike in and asks them to rebuild an old carb, they're just going to put in a carb kit and they're going to walk away, and then they're going to call the job done. But this one, they didn't do a good job, and let me show you why. So you can actually have a look, and I've pulled all the jets out, and all of the jets, sort of the pilot jet and the main jet, you can actually see the main jet as well. It's all new, but there's a couple of things that are quite old. You can see the tube over here is old, and like the needle jet sort of screw, you can actually see is quite old. What they didn't do is they didn't replace the needle jet, and this is what's giving all the issues. Let me explain. So what they've done is they've put the smallest jets on every place. So it's the 150 on the main jet and the smallest jet on the primary or the idle jet, and then they've got a standard needle, and they've got they left the standard tube in. Now, that to me doesn't make sense. If you need to go lean on everything, why would the needle still be standard? So that made me have a look at this needle jet and have a look at where the problem is. And it's actually very, very interesting. So this bike has stood for a while. You can see the difference in color between the parts that have been replaced and the parts that they don't replace. And if you take this needle jet, and I ended up making a new one, but I'll get to that now. If you just put in a reamer and you walk around the jet, you can see like there it's tight, and then look how much play there is on that side. And then you walk around, there's a lot of play there, there's a lot of play there, and then there's a tight section over here. So what's happening is the needle's sitting in this jet, and one side is getting more fuel to the other, so it's preferentially feeding on the one side. And when I stripped this, I actually found a whole lot of sort of gunk on the inside of this needle jet, and that's slowly, as the bike is getting used, that gunk is starting to dissolve into the petrol, and because the needle's going in, it's sort of loosening it up, and that's why all of a sudden my bike is starting to run rich. So I'm going to make a new jet, and I'm going to go slightly smaller on the jet, not much. I'm only going to go between 5 and 10 microns smaller. I'm going to put the new jet in, and what it should do is now I should get both cylinders running even, because there's not one side of the jet that's allowing more fuel in than the other. And let's hope that my fuel consumption improves and the bike doesn't run quite as rich as what it was running. So machining one of these jets is actually relatively easy. There's no fancy machining. The outside can actually be rough. It doesn't really matter as long as you've got a little bit of clearance here for the bypass on the primary jet. And then the needle needs to sit on the inside. Now there's 3 steps here. There's the first step, and then there's another step, and then there's a section over here that the needle actually sort of runs in. Now that needs to be perfect. It needs to be a very smooth surface, and it needs to be perfectly round. So you can be a little bit out with a lot of the stuff, but that center needs to be perfect. And normally when you specify jet, that's what actually gets specified. And it's actually specified within 0.05, so 5 microns, between 10 and 5 microns. Now this is a standard one, so this is 3.13, I think. And I've decided to go 3.12. Now, if you buy yourself a 1/8 silver steel, you can actually make a nice reamer. And this can be done with hand tools outside. You actually don't even need to machine this on a lathe. If you just put it in a drill and you take some fine sandpaper, you can take off 5 to 10 microns and you end up with a very good surface. And then you just take the end off and you make yourself a nice reamer. This reamer is incredibly accurate. They call this a toolmaker's reamer, and it makes a perfectly round hole, because as the reamer goes into the part, like so, provided you get past the cutting surface, the back end of the reamer keeps the hole perfectly round. So if you're machining the surface that the needle needs to sit on, you would ream all the way, and then you would only open that hole afterwards. So then you know that that hole in the middle is perfectly round, and it's the size of this reamer. So this needle jet was made, it took me like an hour. Incidentally, making this needle jet for me was just for fun. I wanted to see if I could do it. But more importantly, buying this needle jet is like $40. It's actually cheaper to go buy a whole new carb from China and get the whole new carb in. But look, I like the Mikuni carb that's on the bike, and if it's not necessary to throw away a carb, then just make a new part. I mean, making this part for me cost like $4. So and it's a new skill, so that's cool. So I'm just going to make that.
I've built up a few bikes, and when I got this bike, it was my first Harley. It's the first V-twin engine, so it was something new for me. And I always thought, hey, this thing's not running quite as well as it should. But look, everyone that I spoke to said, hey, it's a Harley that's an uneven engine, that's how it's supposed to run. But when I saw those black plugs and I went on a long trip and I saw the fuel consumption that's just getting worse and worse and worse, it was time to do something. And I tell you what, changing that jet, woo, this bike is a different animal. The acceleration is so much smoother. I didn't expect it to have quite the effect that it has on the lower range of the carb. And I suppose you do work sort of from a quarter up in town driving certain conditions, but it's definitely smoothed that out very, very nicely. My fuel consumption has improved by orders of magnitude, and the plugs are looking a whole lot better. I think this for £4 was well worth the effort. And the nice thing is, you know, if you make your own jets and you want to tweak a little bit more, then hey, it's relatively easy just to make a new jet or open up a jet that you had, or you know, something like that. This bike is an absolute dream. So just to let you know about some of the symptoms that I had on the bike before I did the change on the jet. The spark plugs were obviously black, and typically the back spark plug was quite a bit richer than the front one. Another interesting thing was when I was on the highway and I stopped at a toll gate or something like that, and the bike was just idling, it had quite an erratic idle. It just wasn't happy idling. The idle was a lot higher than it should be. And typically that is a good indication that you've got a leak on the intake manifold. And I did check that, and I did change the intake manifold seal, so that was fine, but it was still doing that. And then obviously a real bad fuel consumption is a good indication that you've got a problem. And then of course the exhaust pipes were black. I did a 400k trip on the bike. When I got back, it was very black. If I took a white sort of one of those disposable knives and I scraped the exhaust pipes, it shouldn't be that black. So that's a good indication. The thing is, running too rich is probably a little bit better than running too lean, but the problem is you gunk up your engine quickly, and then you start getting post ignition and pinging and all sorts of stuff that you don't really want. So it really needed to be sorted out. So just a quick recap of what was all changed on the carb and where I'm sitting with everything. And I need to find a piece of highway because that's where I'm sort of testing. But anyway, the pilot jet is still the smallest jet. I left that where it was because that's, I think, sort of running like it should be running. And also the air fuel screw mixture, or the pilot screw, is where it should be. It's about 2 turns out, and the bike is happy. Also, if I just open the throttle like that and I roll off, the engine is running compression like it should. And if I just open, the engine doesn't seem to be, it's happy. All right, so that's perfect. That's right where I want to be. The acceleration pump. Yeah, that's where it should be. Oh, that's pretty cool. All right. So the main jet, I can't get over how much smoother this bike is. So the main jet is still the smallest jet, and the main jet you only sort of see or it only comes into effect at 3/4 and above throttle. So if I slack off speed a bit and I'm in top gear and I whop that throttle open all the way, yeah, that engine is happy. It's responding like it should. And now when I do a roll off, I get good compression. Yeah, that's cool. All right, so that's the main jet. That's good. And Now if I want to test the needle, sort of half to 3/4, and then I drop off and the engine is dipping like it should. So previously what it did was, when I dropped off like that, the engine would sort of hesitate a little bit, and it almost felt like it almost felt like I lost compression, and I was riding with the throttle slightly open. Now that's a good indicator of running rich. But I mean, oh, look how responsive this bike is now. I'm in top gear, and opening that throttle is doing exactly what it's supposed to be doing. And what's quite nice is, if I just tickle the throttle at the bottom, the bike is happy. There's no backfiring. I can't hear any issues from the carb. Okay, so just all the things that sort of changed the air to fuel ratio on the bike for various things. Obviously the needle jet, the one that I machined, would have made the bike leaner, because I made it slightly smaller, or much closer to spec. The one that was in was letting a lot more fuel through, and it was letting fuel through on preferentially to the one side. The needle itself was set on the leanest condition. That I put back to the middle position, which made it richer, but that only affects highway driving. Typically you do that anyway when you change a jet. The main jet is what it was, the pilot jet is what it was, so they were on the leanest condition. The accelerator pump nozzle is what it was. That's right for a big twin. And then the floats were changed, so the float height was completely wrong, and changing that made the bike overall richer. So unfortunately, changing a couple of things like that did change a whole lot of things in the carb, but it was necessary to change those things that I had to change because I made a new jet. What I found was, it has changed this bike's response just absolutely beautifully. This bike is so much more smoother. The fuel consumption is fantastic, and the spark plugs look correct. They're not rich. They just look like, the spark plugs look like they should look, from my experience with other bikes. And then the exhaust pipes are starting to clean up nicely as well, because they were really black, but that's going to take a while.
This is what the plugs look like after about 200 k's of highway driving. This is the back cylinder. This was the one that was running rich the whole time. You can see they're just completely different. They got a lovely tan color. There's no glazing. So this looks pretty good.